please turn to 1 Samuel chapter 20. 8 to 10-year-olds are dismissed if you'd like to go to your class. 1 Samuel chapter 20, continuing to see the transition between Saul and David. David coming to the kingship. Saul doesn't know all of that yet. Jonathan, Saul's son, does, evidently. And so we see his and David's connection here in 1 Samuel 20. Glorious chapter, wonderful chapter of Scripture for us. I'm going to read the entire chapter now, and then we'll go through and divide it up and explain it. 1 Samuel chapter 20. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death.' Then Jonathan said to David, 'Whatever you say, I will do for you.' David said to Jonathan, 'Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?' And Jonathan said, 'Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?' Then David said to Jonathan, 'Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?' And Jonathan said to David, 'Come, let us go out into the field.' So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, 'The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth.' And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, 'May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies.' And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, 'Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself, where the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, Go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, Look, the arrows are on this side of you. Take them. Then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever.' So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side. But David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, Something has happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he's not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan, his son, Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" But Saul hurled a spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, David called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed each other and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. I've entitled this message, Covenant Friendship. Covenant Friendship. I remember my first friend. As soon as I could have memories, 4 or 5 years old or so, we moved next door to the Montalvo family. David Montalvo was my first best friend. Lived right across a little fence, right next to each other. So we would kind of hop the fence, go to each other's house. I still remember it fondly, going to his backyard where there's this wonderful plum tree. And so we would pick the plums and eat them in the backyard. I remember making mud pies on the side of the yard, playing basketball in his driveway. There was one low point in our friendship. He had a birthday party. I think it was his 5th birthday party. Family, friends, cousins, huge family came over. And we fought over a water gun, and I hit him on the forehead and gave him stitches at his birthday party. But let's strike that from the record. Let's remember the plum trees, okay? David and I kind of lost touch. My family moved away from that house. We would still see each other kind of in the elementary years. I'd go over to his house, hang out. In high school, we hardly ever saw each other, just lived in different cities, and I'd occasionally see him maybe at the mall and things like that, and it was always a sweet time to see each other. But we just grew older, lost touch, but I remember those early days fondly. This often happens with friendships, right? We've got fond memories of maybe college friends, high school friends, and then we find now that we really haven't spoken to them in 20 years or so. And the friendships come and go. Life happens, we grow older, busyness separates friends. Sometimes death separates friends. Sometimes offenses separate friends. Friendships are harder to maintain as we get older, but we are meant to have deep and lasting friendships. We talked about this last Tuesday. 90 of you came to the leadership discussion we did on biblical friendships. We are meant to have lasting friendships. Friendships are rooted in the character of God. God is a relational being. God is said to be a friend. He spoke to Moses as a friend, Exodus 33. God in human flesh, Jesus Christ, called his disciples his friends the night before he would die. Friendships are rooted in the character of God. Deep friendships are a wonderful thing. And this passage gives us some glimpses into one of the most well-known friendships, not just in biblical history, but in all human history. This passage right here. So I want to talk through the friendship happening in this passage because I believe it's meant to give us an indication of a positive response to God's work that he's doing through David. See, the book of 1 Samuel is a book about replacements, right? Samuel replaces the judges in Israel. Priests are replaced. Failed priests are replaced with new priests. Failed King Saul is replaced with King David, the man after God's own heart. This is a book about replacements. And so often, as it happens just in all of life, when one replaces another, there's animosity and hatred. And we see that. We saw that last time with King Saul. But Jonathan's different. Jonathan is the heir to the throne, but he commits himself to someone else who would become king and take his throne, as it were. He commits himself to David, and in that, the Bible shows us a picture of true friendship. So we'll see three features of covenant friendship in this passage. Three features of covenant friendship. And as we go through this, I'm going to refer to a few friendships, historical friendships in Christian history. I'm going to look back at church history and just kind of give you some information on some historical friendships. I hope that that's just an encouragement to your soul. Friendships today, I fear, aren't what they once were, but maybe we could learn a little bit as we study friendship in these last weeks, these most recent weeks. So the first feature of covenant friendship to understand is this, found in verses 1 through 17. Covenant friendships demonstrate the steadfast love of God. Covenant friendships demonstrate the steadfast love of God. Verse 1, then David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? We just left the place where Saul was really taken over by the Spirit of God and began prophesying. It was kind of in a disgraced way. He was lying naked and prophesying about God. And David saw that as a time to, well, Saul's laying here naked, I'll scram. And so he gets out of the environment that Saul was in. He gets out of that area and leaves, goes back, finds Jonathan and says, what's the deal? Why is he trying to kill me? And evidently, Jonathan didn't know all that Saul was trying to do. He didn't know about the depth of Saul's hatred for David. So Jonathan said to him, far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. My dad hasn't told me anything about trying to kill you. And why should my father hide this from me? It's not so. But David vowed again, saying, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Your dad knows that you're going to be the next king, and he sees your friendship with me and thinks that you're just going to let me have the throne, or you're not going to care about this. No wonder he's not telling you. And remember, Saul was a powerful king. Saul had a number of military victories. Saul had servants all throughout. It wasn't just that David had to hide from Saul. He would have had to hide from Saul's men and the military. There were people all around who were loyal to Saul. And so David says, there's but a step between me and death. I mean, if I turn the wrong corner, I'm done. If I see the wrong person, I'm done. Jonathan evidently believes what David's saying. Verse 4, then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I'll do for you. Okay, what do you need? David said to Jonathan, listen, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. So every new moon, there would be a 2-day feast, and there'd be guests of honor at the king's table. David would be one of those guests of honor. Remember, he was often the musician at these types of feasts. And so he said, I'm scheduled to have dinner with you and your dad and Abner, his general, and I'm not going to go. Verse 6, if your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says good, it will be well with your servant, but if he's angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly, you, Jonathan, deal kindly with your servant, me, David, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Now, David's being deceitful here, but just let that go for today, okay? This isn't a discussion about Old Testament ethics today. But David's got a plan. Here's the plan. you're going to say that I'm going back to Bethlehem to have a feast with my family. I was summoned by my brother. We're going to have a feast with my family. And if it's no big deal, then great. If it is a big deal, he wants to kill me. And please don't forget that you made a covenant with me. We've got a covenant friendship here. But if there's guilt in me, David continues in verse 8, but if there's guilt in me, kill me yourself, or why should you bring me to your father? If I've done anything wrong, why don't you just take care of it right now? Why should I be brought before your father? And Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers roughly? And Jonathan said to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. We need some more privacy. This is not the best place to have this conversation. Come, let us go out into the field. I'll tell you what I'll do when I find out the answer. Verse 12, they're out in the field. Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not send and disclose it to you? So we might have our answer tomorrow. It might be the third day after the 2-day festival. As soon as I get the answer, I'll let you know. 13, but should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Listen, if I don't tell you, then I should die too. This is Jonathan saying, I will let you know. I will tell you exactly where my father stands. I'll let you know. Verse 14, if I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. Jonathan knows that being loyal to his friend could cost him. It's not out of the realm of possibility that a father king would kill his son. That happens in that culture. So Jonathan knows that if he's loyal to David, he could die. And so he's asking David to do good to his family even if he himself dies. Jonathan will die at the end of 1 Samuel. And so David's saying, this covenant friendship extends beyond my life and yours. Why would Jonathan be so concerned about his family members after he died? Well, because what do you do if you're a king in the ancient Near East and you ascend to the throne? You murder all your enemies. That's what you do. And again, kingship is new to Israel, but they saw the kings around them. They knew what to do. You get to the throne, you destroy your enemies. No more threats. And so Jonathan's saying, hey, listen, if I die, please don't destroy my family. They might not have this friendship with you, but based on my friendship with you, please keep them alive. We'll see what David does with that. Verse 15, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Jonathan knows that part of even God's providence might be to eliminate some of David's enemies. So he's asking David to keep his family members alive for the sake of their friendship, David and Jonathan's. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. I want you to focus in on that phrase in verse 14, because this is really the heart of their connection, their friendship. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord. And, verse 15, do not cut off your steadfast love for my house forever. Steadfast love is a strong term. That is a very binding term. When you think of steadfast love and you think about it in biblical terms, you don't really think of friendship. You think of God and man. God has said dozens of times just in the Old Testament to have steadfast love for his people. The term is hesed. It's a Hebrew word that is very famous in the Old Testament. It speaks of a love from God that is not fickle. It is committed. In fact, it's eternally committed. This is a strong word. Some synonyms for hesed, steadfast love, that all should be lumped together. Kindness, loyalty, mercy, covenant faithfulness. This love overcomes sin. You see the people of God constantly sinning against him, and he constantly remembers his steadfast love for them. And he uses that language all throughout Scripture. This love overcomes sin, it overcomes time, it overcomes distance, it overcomes coldness on the part of Israel. It's a relationship rooted in the love of God. Listen, there are, again, plenty of passages to read about the steadfast love of God, but I want to read one for you and then show you one. It's fascinating. Psalm 145:8, the Lord is gracious and merciful. That's good news to sinful people. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Elsewhere it says that his steadfast love is as high as the mountains, as high as the clouds. Lamentations 3. You can turn there, actually. I think it might help to see this. Lamentations 3. The word lamentation or lament isn't a happy word, is it? When you think of lament, you think biblically of sackcloth and ashes, you think of tears, you think of sorrow. Lamentations is written by the prophet Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, because Israel has disgraced the Lord so much, and they're in exile, and it's horrible, they're sinful, they've rejected their good God, and this is the book of Lamentations. I'm just going to skip around. I'm going to skip through, just kind of skip some stones across the surface of Lamentations 3, if you will. Listen just some of these verses, okay? Verse 1. I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. So this is the person in the covenant community of God who knows he's sinned against God, Jeremiah representing the nation, and he's saying, I'm under the rod of God. I'm being disciplined by God. Verse 4, he has made my flesh and my skin waste away. He's broken my bones. Skip down. 10, he's a bear lying in wait for me. He's talking about God. A lion in hiding. Down to 16, he's made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I've forgotten what happiness is. Some of you know this feeling. Verse 18, so I say, my endurance has perished. I can't take it any longer. So has my hope from the Lord. I don't have any more hope in the Lord. I'm at the end. Verse 19, remember my affliction in my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. By the way, he's not blaming God. Remember my wanderings. He's looking at the heaviness of God, the opposition of God, and he knows why it's there. Verse 20, my soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. And then this, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Okay, don't look down. Don't ruin the surprise. What in the world changes his mind? I mean, he just said, I can't take it anymore. You think there'd be a period at the end of the sentence, but there's a comma. But, what is it, Jeremiah? Verse 22, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. And then he says to the Lord, great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Remember verse 18? My hope in the Lord's been removed. Now, all of a sudden, he remembers the faithfulness of God, and he says that, therefore, I will hope in him. Skip down to verse 31. For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, he will have compassion, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not afflict from his heart or grieve the children of men. Isn't that so good? And friends, I'll remind you, the same God of Lamentations 3 is the same God of February 2021. It's the same God. His character doesn't change. Go back to 1 Samuel 20. So now you know when Jonathan says to David, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, you know what he's saying. David, commit yourself to me forever. David, commit yourself to my family forever. That is a covenant friendship that demonstrates the steadfastness of God, the steadfast love of God. That's what a friendship, a strong, promise-keeping friendship looks like. You communicate the forbearance of God, the patience of God, the love for God, even when there's sin in the relationship, even when there's trouble, there are threats. You commit the steadfast love of God to one another. Covenant friendships demonstrate the steadfast love of God. That's what Jonathan's asking David for. And has Jonathan himself shown this to David? Yes, he has. Jonathan's not just asking for that type of friendship, he's giving that type of friendship. I told you before about the friendship with John Newton and William Calper. It's really fascinating. It's such an encouraging friendship to read about. These two men had very different personalities. It was said that, just being around John Newton, he would just captivate you by his presence. And if you were in the presence of William Calper, you might fall asleep. They were just different, but close friends. Calper himself, as you know, struggled with depression, struggled with anxieties. The dark night of the soul, as it's been called, was something that Calper experienced greatly and experienced often. These two men spent a lot of time together, often Newton caring for Calper. There was actually a field in between their homes in Olney, over in England. And there was a field, and they paid the woman who owned the field a fee every year so that instead of having to walk all the way around to each other's house, they could just cut across the field. So Newton, his wife, living in one home and then crossing the field and going to Calper, who never married but had an older mother-like figure that cared for him. So they would meet each other, spend time together, pray together. They actually wrote a hymn book together. You can still read these hymns. There are plenty of them. They wrote a hymn book together, and they were just spiritual friends. Sometimes Newton would be called to Calper's side in the middle of the night because of his deep distress and anxiety, and he would sit up for hours with Calper, just comforting him, praying with him, reading to him, talking to him. This was their friendship. It was a deep friendship. Newton and his wife eventually went to London. That was a difficult move for both families. But later on in life, Calper died, and Newton, who was about 73 at the time, preached at Calper's funeral. And he preached an interesting passage at his funeral. He preached Exodus 3, verses 2 to 3. The angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame. This is talking about Moses, the burning bush. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And as he started reading his text, people wondered, why is he preaching this at his dear friend's funeral? And Newton looked up from his Bible and said this to those that were there mourning. He said, I know of no text in the whole book of God's word more suited to the case of my dear friend than what I have read. He was indeed a bush in flames for 27 years, but he was not consumed. Just saw the hand of God continuing to care for Calper, even though he struggled for so long. And then Newton said this about his friend, the Lord has given me many friends, but with none have I so great an intimacy as with my friend, Mr. Calper. Just a special, covenant, enduring friendship. A friendship that was not easy. Very difficult. They had to work through conflict sometimes. They had to work through offenses. One was called over to the other's house late at night sometimes. They had to work at it. But in that friendship, they demonstrated, like David and Jonathan's, the covenant friendship of God. The steadfast love of God for his people. There's a second feature of covenant friendship that you see with David and Jonathan. It's that covenant friendships are united in God. Christians should have the best friendships in the world. Christians should have the best friendships in the world because our God has committed himself to us, sinners, for eternity. And we should demonstrate the friendship that God gives to us as we give it to one another. Covenant friendships are united in God. Let's look at verses 18 to 34. Then Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you'll be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, go, find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them, then you are to come to me. For as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. So if I shoot him over here, you know you're safe. All right, would have been a common thing as a king or someone in royalty is shooting the arrows, practicing their archery, their war skills, that they would have a servant boy go and retrieve the arrows, because after all, I don't want to go chase my arrows. Okay, kid, you go get them. So Jonathan's just kind of laying out the plan for David. Verse 22, but if I say to the young boy, the youth, look at the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away, David. As for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. So you may need to go right away. They didn't know if they'd be able to meet and talk before they left. And if not, David, you've got to go. But just remember what we've spoken to each other. The Lord is between us forever. Remember, you're going to keep your promise to my family if something happens to me. And I'm loyal to you too. Okay, there's the plan. Verse 24, so David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. So the dining room looks like this. There's a wall behind the king, because the king is going to see everybody that comes in. All right? Some of you in law enforcement, you know this. Every time we go to coffee, you're like, I need to sit in the corner where I can see everyone. Okay, we get it. Okay, good. That was King Saul. Sitting there, sees everyone, his back to the wall. Abner over here on his left, my left. Abner over here. David would have been here to the right. Jonathan would have been at the end of the table over there. Okay, so to eat with the king at the new moon feast would have been quite the privilege. So to have an empty seat it stands out. So David's seat's empty, all right? 26. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought something has happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he's not clean. So if David would have been ceremonially unclean, it would have made sense. You've got to miss the day's feast. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. Now he would be clean. He should be here. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, again, it's not a time to talk about Old Testament ethics, all right? He just goes along with the plan. David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. David saying to Jonathan, not really, but that's the plan. For this reason, Jonathan says, he's not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. Saul knows his son Jonathan has committed himself to someone who could take his throne. Stupid Jonathan, thinks Saul. And he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. If that sounds like an ancient Near East cuss word, that's exactly what it is. Okay? You son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? I mean, your mother birthed you, and you're going to be the next king, and what a shame you are to us because you've chosen the son of Jesse. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. Saul's so angry. Last week we saw that Saul was angry and tried to kill David, right? 3 times. Now he's trying to kill his own son for being loyal to David. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. You think? Yeah. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month. He leaves the feast early, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. You see that this relationship is united in Jonathan's commitment to David because there's a bond that God has brought them together. Jonathan is committed to David, not just because I don't really care about being king, you go ahead and take it. That's not what this is about. This is Jonathan recognizing what the Lord is doing through David. And he's more committed, Jonathan is, to God than he is to his father. He's more committed to what God is doing than he is to his father. And so he commits himself to David. This relationship is rooted in what God is doing, in who God is. Already in a few chapters, 18 through 20, you've seen David and Jonathan talk a lot about God, the God of Israel, the God that's between them. This is a relationship rooted in God. Some of you know this. You're born, you're raised, you're in a home that's not a Christian home, and then you become a Christian and you get united to a local assembly of people, and they become your deepest relationships. You have new mothers and fathers in the faith, as it were. And you may even have a good relationship with your unbelieving family, but it cannot go as deep as you can go with your brothers and sisters in Christ, right? Because you've got an eternal bond. So Saul is connected to David even more than his father because of the bond in God that they have together. It reminds us of Ruth, right? Ruth losing her husband, and her sister-in-law also lost her husband, and so Naomi, their mother-in-law, is going to go back to their people, and Ruth's like, I'm coming with you. And Naomi's like, no. I don't have any more sons. You can't marry I don't have a son for you. You just stay where you are. Let me go back to my people. And Ruth says these famous words, where you will go, I will go. Where you will lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. And the most important statement that Ruth makes, indicating a change of direction for Ruth, and your God will be my God. That's a friendship, Ruth and Naomi, rooted in the living God. The living God has joined them together. It's no surprise that the Son of God, God himself, God incarnate, would come through the line of Ruth and her soon-to-be husband. So this covenant friendship is united in God. God is the source of the friendship between David and Jonathan. It reminds me of Jonathan Edwards and his wife Sarah, this sweet friendship, this sweet marriage. And you get an indication of what their relationship was all about, even on Jonathan's deathbed. Jonathan Edwards had gone to be the president of the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton, had gone there to be the new president. He was president for 1 week and then died. But on his deathbed, he's away from Sarah, who would have been back at Northampton, Massachusetts. He's away from Sarah, and so he writes a letter, and he says this, Dear Lucy, so he's writing to his daughter, it seems to me to be the will of God that I must shortly leave you and therefore give my kindest love to my dear wife and tell her that the uncommon union that has so long subsisted between us has been of such a nature as I trust is spiritual and therefore will continue forever. Their marriage was rooted in God, and therefore Jonathan knew that it wasn't an eternal marriage, no marriage in heaven, but it was an eternal bond that would last forever. There's something about friendships rooted in God that are so special and so unique. And David and Jonathan had one. I exhorted the men yesterday. In closing, I encouraged them, as just kind of an application from the morning, to have a friend that you can go deep with spiritually and meet with them regularly. Read the Bible together, study it together, pour out your hearts to one another, have this bond that's rooted in God. Have a friendship where it involves 3 people, you, your friend, and the living God who loves both of you. This is David and Jonathan, and this type of friendship is a great gift to people. There's a third feature of covenant friendships that we see in the very last paragraph here, chapter 20. Covenant friendships continue into eternity. Got a glimpse of that with Edwards writing to his wife, but covenant friendships continue on into eternity. Listen to how this account ends. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy, and he said to his boy, Run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. We know what that means. Saul's going to be after you. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" So, David might not be peeking out. He's just hearing what's going on. "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Beyond, wink, wink, letting David know what Saul's disposition is. Verse 38, and Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. It's not out of the realm of possibility, by the way, that the boy, if he saw David, would let Saul know. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan, verse 40, gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." Again, the day before, we knew they couldn't count on the fact they might be able to talk together, but it works out. Jonathan tells his boy to go back. Now there's no one around, so Jonathan and David can meet again. Verse 41, as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times, and they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Because David's not only going to be leaving his friend, he's also, Saul's trying to murder him. Of course, he would be weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. These friends will see each other again, but they don't know it at this point. They don't know if they will. This might be the last time they see each other. If any of you have had a close friend die, you know this type of pain and grief. If you've had someone close to you die, you understand why they're weeping. You understand this. And notice again, Jonathan bringing up the bond that they have. We've promised each other. We've committed ourselves to each other, even if we don't see each other again. This is a friendship that continues on into eternity. And if Canyon Bible Church was around in, let's say, the 1800s or even the early 1900s, I wouldn't need to say the next thing I'm going to say. But recently in history, people have said that this friendship is about a homosexual relationship. And so what people do is what often false doctrine comes from. People read their own experiences and their own desires into a text. That's not how you interpret the Bible. You rewind the tape, take your time machine, go back into 1100 BC, and understand what these words meant to those people and those readers. And then you say, okay, here's what it meant. You don't get to say, here's what these words mean today, so here's what it meant then. Here's what kissing means today, so here's what it meant then. Even today in the ancient Near East, men kiss each other as friends. It's a cultural thing. There, they did it. That's what they did. They kissed one another. Even now, when I see, I'm an adult man. When I go see my father, he'll hug me and give me a kiss on the cheek. That's life in many cultures. This is not a statement. This is not a relationship that is rooted in homosexuality. In fact, the Hebrew words that are used for David and Jonathan's love are not used for that type of relationship anywhere in the Old Testament. And there are words used for that type of relationship, but not the same ones that are used for David and Jonathan's relationship. You know what the words used for David and Jonathan's relationship refer to in the Old Testament? Friendship. Loyal friendship. Loyal love between friends. So, people today who want the Bible to say something that it doesn't say will make up an interpretation that affirms their sinful lifestyle. People today aren't comfortable, and this is sad, people today aren't comfortable with godly brotherly affection between male friends. Our society's done that to us. It makes even things like, it twists beautiful things like this into something sinful. Sounds a lot like Satan, twisting the Word of God for his own purposes. That's what happens. But again, males in the ancient Near East kissed one another. Males all over the globe today, in Middle Eastern countries, in Russia, I mean, you'll see that. There's a bond there. Not all kissing is sexual. Not all physical affection is sexual, but our our society turns everything physical into sex so fast. And that's sad. But we have to spend time talking about that. Back to a wonderful passage about beautiful friendship. Covenant friendships continue on into eternity. This is two friends not knowing if they're going to see each other, weeping over the fact that they might not see each other and one of them could die. In fact, both of them could die. And I want you to see that these guys weren't just making random promises to each other. Yeah, I'll be good to your family. As long as I live, I'll be good to your family. And it just didn't mean anything to them. Their word meant something. Again, it'd be great if that came back again too. Your word means something. They're promising their friendship to one another all throughout the last 3 chapters. And so, as I told you, at the end of 1 Samuel, Jonathan will die. Jonathan and Saul both die. And David's grieved. You can see that in 2 Samuel early on. I wonder if David kept his commitment to Jonathan. Again, usually you ascend the throne, you eliminate all your enemies. Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 9. What a beautiful picture this is. David and Jonathan's friendship lasted beyond Jonathan's death. And that's what you should understand from this. 2 Samuel 9, verse 1. David, just let me kind of tell you what's happened between 1 Samuel 20 and 2 Samuel chapter 9. David and Saul continue their, one ascending the throne, one losing the throne. Saul and Jonathan end up dying at the end of 1 Samuel. David then becomes this victorious king, this man after God's own heart. It looks so good for so long, and this is what God surely wants. And it's really good. And then 2 Samuel 9 comes, and it says this in verse 1, and David said, "Is there still anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" So he asks one of his servants, "Hey, is there any remaining family members in Saul's house that I could be good to?" Why? For Jonathan's sake. That brings us back to our passage today, because David made a promise to Jonathan. So skip down. He finds out there's actually a son of Jonathan, and David didn't know he was still alive. Verse 9. Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant. So he finds a servant of Saul that's still alive, and he calls the servant of Saul and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson." So Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son. So David's saying, listen, master of Saul's household, Saul had a grandson, my friend Jonathan's son. I want him to have everything that Saul had. Verse 10, "And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth," there's the boy's name, Jonathan's son, "Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, that's the servant, said to the king David, "According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do." Okay, I'll do it. So Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, ate at David's table. Think of the table connection in the book of Samuel. David sits at Saul's table. Saul hates him, throws a spear at him. Here, David commits himself to Jonathan's son, and he's not going to kill Jonathan's son. He's going to sit at his table. He's going to be home. Verse 12, "And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah." I love that. Micah means who is like the Lord. "And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both feet." He was crippled. So David does good to Jonathan's handicapped son, and he is at home in the house of the king. This is David keeping his promise to his friend who's died. This bond meant something. Their friendship went past even Jonathan's own life. their friendship extended beyond generations. One of my prayers recently, as I've been thinking about covenant friendship and the beauty of friendship, Christian friendship, is, Lord, may the friends I have now be a benefit to the generations that come from me. May somehow they bless my kids and their kids. And the Lord often does things like that. Covenant friendships continue into eternity. I'll finish with one last illustration from church history. Philip Doddridge was a well-known friend of Isaac Watts. Isaac Watts, the great hymn writer of so many of the hymns that we love. Joy to the World is one. So Doddridge learns that Watts is dying, and hearing of his soon death, he says this: I heard by last post that my beloved friend, Dr. Watts, stood just on the verge of eternity. If he yet lives, tell him that my heart feels a flame of friendship for him, which I am fully persuaded will burn forever. Just wanted his friend to know, my heart's so inflamed by our friendship, and I know that will never go out. This bond will last forever. Friends, Christians should be different at friendship than the rest of the world. Christian friendships should last longer than a few years. Christian friendships should last into eternity because they're about God. And He's an eternal God who eternally fellowships with His people. And so His people should have eternal bonds. That's what we see here in 1 Samuel 20 with David and Jonathan. And before I close, let me say this to you young people. A number of young people in this room, you're in school age, maybe grammar school. Do they call it grammar anymore? Do I sound like an old person? Elementary school? I don't know. Whatever you kids call it nowadays. 6th grade and below, okay? Some of you are in junior high school, college. You are in the stage of life where you make friends that will begin to last for a long time. And you can make friends by finding people who have common interests as you. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would encourage you to look for friends who will worship God with you and who will make you a stronger follower of God, and you be that to them. I stand here as a 44-year-old guy, and I've had both types of friends with common interests and friends who encourage me in the Lord and worship the Lord together with me. I will give anything for one of those friends that will stand with me in the Lord and encourage me toward greater worship of Him and greater faithfulness to Him and greater enjoyment of Him. You want those types of friends, and they are not common, but they are there. God gives them. Look for people like that. Look for people who will tell you the truth, who will love you, who will care for you, who will shepherd your soul, and who you can benefit as well. Look for those types of people. Look for them in elementary school. Look for them in junior high. Look for them in college. Look for them in the early years as you start your career. Look for them. And all of us, if you're retired and you've only maybe got a year left or so, the hourglass is running out, you can still look for godly friends to encourage you in the final days. They are there, and many of them could be in this room. God has gifted us with each other for the sake of an eternal bond. So, we learn here that covenant friendships demonstrate the steadfast love of God. They're united in God, and they continue on into eternity. And we cannot end without talking about the greatest friend who ever lived. And that is not hyperbole. In Matthew 11, Jesus is getting some bad press. The religious leaders of the day were making him to appear as if he were a sinful man. Why? Because he was a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Tax collectors, prostitutes, evil people. He was evidently a friend to them, and he was accused of being a friend to them. And so often in the Gospels, the enemies of Jesus get him right. Oftentimes they get him wrong, but there are a number of places where they get him right. in the Gospel of Mark, the first people to cry out about the fact that he is the living Son of God are demons, and his disciples aren't getting it. So oftentimes, God uses his enemies to point out who he really is. Jesus is called in Matthew 11:19 the friend of sinners. And Christians for the last 2,000 years have loved that term because we've been sinners whom he's befriended. That's us. We've been those sinners. He's made himself a friend to us. I love what Luke 15 says in Luke's passage, that passage about the Son of Man seeking the lost and finding the lost. It says, now tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. Sometimes self-righteous people are not the people that tax collectors and sinners want to be around. I'm not good enough for you. You think you're holier than thou. You would never welcome me. And sometimes self-righteous people will not befriend sinners. And that's a travesty. But the most righteous man who ever lived evidently drew sinners to himself. There was something about him where they felt at home. And we know that he wasn't excusing their sin. He would tell them things like, go and sin no more. But he invited them into a relationship with him. This is the greatest friend to ever live. He's the friend of sinners. Jesus Christ came to befriend sinners. He said, I didn't come for the righteous. And the idea behind that is because evidently they don't need me. I came for the sinners. I came for the sick. I came for those that need a friend, who because of their sin find themselves alienated not just from other people but from God. I came to bring the friendship of God to people who have been anything but friends to him. That's why Jesus came. If you're here and you're looking for a friend, that's not a bad desire. I hope you find one, and I hope you find one in a Christian. But Jesus Christ is the eternal friend of sinners. He came to reconcile you to his Father. He loves his friends, and he makes everlasting commitments to them. Christians understand this. That's why we gather around every 7 days, and together in one giant group we sing to him, because he's our friend. He's befriended us. This friend came to die for sinners, not just befriend them. It wasn't just that he'd welcome them. He would then die for their sins. He would die for their tax collecting. He would die for their prostitution. He would die and be punished as they should be, but he would be punished in their place. So new friends of Jesus come to him, know that he'll welcome them, and they turn from their sin and they follow him, their new friend, that's laid down his life for them. John chapter 15 actually says that you can see the most beautiful friendship by the fact that a friend lays down his life for another. And Jesus did that. So Jesus, sir, ma'am, young person, Jesus has died to bring you into friendship with him. Trust why he died. He died for your sin. He died to give you righteousness, because Jesus is by nature an eternal friend. I'm gonna shepherd you toward next Sunday's Lord's table, okay? There are two ordinances in the church today. One is baptism. We're gonna enjoy that here in a moment. The other is Lord's table. We'll get to that next week. But just to kind of give you a little taste of next week, okay? Brad's gonna lead us next week. That's the plan, Lord willing. Here's a little taste. The night before he was betrayed, Jesus told his disciples, I'm no longer calling you servants. You're my friends. I'm calling you friends. I'm disclosing to you all that the Father has to say. I'm bringing you in. And he knew it was the night before he'd die. So he tells the disciples, no longer do I call you servants, now I call you friends. And what does he do that night? What is the context of that statement? They're at a meal together at the table. They're celebrating the Passover, God's rescue of his people from Egypt. And he turns the Passover meal into a meal of rescuing his friends. You're going to eat this and remember that my body was was broken for you. My blood was shed for you. Jesus is telling them that they're his friends at a meal that signifies what that friendship is rooted in, his death for them. And so he says in Matthew 26 these words. He took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink it, all of you, for this is the blood of the covenant." It's a covenant friendship. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." That's eternity. So we look at David and Jonathan, and we see that Jesus is the ultimate David and Jonathan. We see in David and Jonathan, wow, that's a friendship that shows off the steadfast love of God. That's a friendship rooted in God. That's a friendship that lasts into eternity. And then you fast forward to John 15 and Matthew 26, and you see Jesus, the perfect man, befriend sinners and tells them, this is a friendship rooted in God. This is a friendship that communicates steadfast love, and this is a friendship that goes on to eternity. And he said, one day I'm going to eat with you again. This is an eternal friendship. So if there are any of you here, even if you're a Christian, you're struggling with sin, you know you're not right with God on a just kind of a day-to-day level, I want to remind you of the fact that you are right with him because of his covenant friendship with you. He has covenanted himself to you, and he died to keep that. You're not going anywhere. His friendship is secure. I want you to rest in that. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this picture that David and Jonathan point us to. I'm asking you for the gift of friendship all throughout this congregation. Unite us to one another all the more. Turn friendships that look like the world's friendships, turn them into covenant and lasting friendships. May we do good to one another, forbear with one another, endure, care for, all the things that our God has done for us. May we do that for one another. We pray this in the name of Christ. Amen.